I'm going to share something with you today that took years to fully understand, and I want to be upfront from the start. I'm not a doctor, and this isn't medical advice. What I'm sharing is what the research says, and what seniors over 60 deserve to know about the connection between one specific food and blood sugar, something most doctors simply don't have time to explain in a rushed 15-minute appointment. Here's the truth most seniors never get told clearly. High blood sugar isn't just a diabetes problem. It's a problem for anyone over 60 whose blood sugar rises after meals and doesn't come back down quickly. Every sharp rise triggers a cascade of inflammatory activity in blood vessel walls, including the tiny vessels feeding your kidneys, heart, brain, and eyes. Repeated thousands of times over the years, these spikes are one of the most consistent mechanisms behind the chronic conditions of aging, kidney disease, heart disease, and cognitive decline included. Most people manage blood sugar through medication, dietary limits, and calorie counting, and if you're on medication, it's essential and should never be stopped or adjusted without your doctor's guidance. There's one food, backed by decades of clinical research, that consistently produces one of the strongest blood sugar lowering responses of any dietary intervention studied, a food many seniors already eat regularly, without knowing its specific, remarkable effect on blood sugar after meals. Today, I'm revealing that food, exactly what it does at the cellular level, why it works especially well for people over 60, and how to use it correctly, because the timing matters just as much as the food itself, and it's the part almost everyone gets wrong. The food is cinnamon, and before you assume you've already heard this story, stay with me, because what most people know about cinnamon and blood sugar is only the surface. To understand why it works, you first need to understand why blood sugar tends to climb after 60 in the first place, and that comes down to insulin resistance. Insulin is the hormone your pancreas releases to signal cells throughout your body to absorb glucose from the blood. Think of insulin as a key, and the insulin receptor on each cell as the lock it fits into. In a younger, healthy body, the key fits every lock cleanly, insulin binds, the cell door opens, glucose moves in, and blood sugar drops back to normal quickly. After 60, the locks themselves start to change. Insulin receptors become less responsive, partly through inflammatory damage to the receptor proteins, partly through accumulated cellular stress, and partly through changes in cell membrane composition that make receptors structurally less sensitive. The key no longer fits as well. Your pancreas compensates by producing more insulin to get the same effect, but eventually even higher insulin output can't fully make up for reduced receptor sensitivity, and blood sugar stays elevated longer than it should after meals. This is insulin resistance, and to some degree it's present in the majority of people over 60, whether or not they've ever been formally diagnosed with diabetes. Here's what makes cinnamon genuinely remarkable against this exact mechanism. It contains a unique group of compounds, most notably one called MHCP, along with cinnamaldehyde, that do something very few natural substances can do. They activate the insulin receptor independently of insulin itself. MHCP has a specific molecular shape that lets it bind to insulin receptors and trigger the same internal signaling cascade insulin normally sets off, an effect researchers call insulin mimetic. In plain terms, cinnamon acts like a backup key for locks that insulin can no longer open as efficiently on its own. And this isn't a minor or theoretical effect. A study published in a respected diabetes research journal found that adults with type 2 diabetes who consumed cinnamon daily showed fasting blood glucose reductions of 18 to 29%, depending on dose, along with meaningful drops in triglycerides and LDL cholesterol, from cinnamon alone with no other dietary changes. A separate review pooling 10 randomized controlled trials found consistent reductions in fasting blood glucose, post-meal blood sugar spikes, and HbA1c, the 3-month blood sugar average doctors rely on to track long-term control. What makes this especially relevant for people over 60 specifically, rather than younger adults with mild insulin resistance, is a second mechanism working alongside the first. Part of why insulin receptors lose sensitivity with age is chronic oxidative stress damaging the receptor proteins themselves over time. Cinnamon's cinnamaldehyde and polyphenol content provides real antioxidant protection to cell membranes and receptor proteins, slowing the oxidative damage that accelerates receptor degradation as cells age. So cinnamon isn't only activating receptors in their current, already damaged state, it's also helping protect those receptors from further deterioration going forward. Seniors, that combination of activation and protection addresses insulin resistance from two angles at once, both the functional problem happening right now and the structural decline driving it over time. Before going further, there's a distinction that matters enormously here, and it's one most people never hear about. Not all cinnamon is the same, and for daily use at doses meaningful for blood sugar, this difference is critical. Most cinnamon sold in supermarkets, ground cinnamon in jars, cinnamon sticks, most supplement products, is cassia cinnamon, sometimes called Chinese cinnamon. Cassia contains meaningful amounts of a compound called coumarin, which in large daily doses can stress the liver and, importantly for anyone thinking about kidney health, can add strain to the kidneys over time, since they're responsible for processing and clearing coumarin's metabolites. For occasional cooking, the coumarin in cassia isn't a real concern. But for daily therapeutic use at the doses needed for blood sugar management, that coumarin content becomes genuinely relevant, especially for anyone with any degree of reduced kidney function. Ceylon cinnamon, sometimes called true cinnamon or Sri Lankan cinnamon, contains dramatically less coumarin. Estimates put it at 250 to 1,000 times lower than cassia, while still delivering the same MHCP and cinnamaldehyde compounds responsible for the blood sugar benefits, at a fraction of the coumarin load. Ceylon is really the only form appropriate for daily, ongoing use, and it's increasingly available at health food stores, online, and even in some mainstream supermarkets. It's typically labeled specifically as Ceylon cinnamon or true cinnamon, tends to be slightly lighter in color than cassia, and has a subtler, slightly sweeter, more complex flavor. If it isn't labeled clearly, check the Latin name. Ceylon is Cinnamomum verum or Cinnamomum zeylanicum, while cassia is Cinnamomum cassia or Cinnamomum aromaticum. If a cinnamon product doesn't specify one of those Ceylon names, it's safest to assume it's cassia and not use it for regular daily consumption. Now for the part almost everyone gets wrong, timing. This is exactly why so many people try cinnamon for blood sugar and never see the results the research consistently shows, because taking it at the wrong time essentially wastes its main benefit. Here's why timing matters so much. The blood sugar spike from a meal happens within roughly 30 to 90 minutes of eating. That's the window where glucose concentration peaks in the blood, insulin is working hardest to clear it, and the inflammatory damage to blood vessel walls from that glucose surge is at its most active. Cinnamon's MHCP to activate insulin receptors right at the moment glucose is flooding into the bloodstream. It needs to already be absorbed and present in your system before that surge begins. Cinnamon taken after a meal, or at some unrelated point in the day, simply isn't active in your system during the exact window when its insulin mimetic effect would actually matter. The correct approach is to take Ceylon cinnamon roughly 15 to 30 minutes before your largest carbohydrate-containing meal of the day. For most people over 60, that's typically lunch or dinner. That window gives the active compounds enough time to be absorbed from the gut and reach the bloodstream right as post-meal glucose is entering it. Research examining this specific pre-meal timing found that the blood sugar response to the following meal was reduced by as much as 29% compared to the same meal eaten without pre-meal cinnamon, a meaningfully larger effect than cinnamon taken at random times throughout the day. As for dose, half a teaspoon to 1 full teaspoon of ground Ceylon cinnamon daily is the range most consistently used in research showing real blood sugar effects. You can mix it into warm water, stir it into herbal tea, or add it directly to food right before eating. One simple version worth trying: half a teaspoon of Ceylon cinnamon in 8 ounces of warm water, with a squeeze of fresh lemon juice and a small pinch of black pepper. The black pepper meaningfully increases how well your body absorbs cinnamaldehyde, through a mechanism similar to how it boosts turmeric absorption. Drink it about 15 minutes before your first or largest meal of the day. Here's where this connects to kidney health specifically. Repeated post-meal blood sugar spikes damage the small blood vessels that supply the kidney's filtering units. This glycemic vascular damage is one of the 2 primary mechanisms, alongside chronic inflammation, through which diet-related kidney decline tends to progress after 60. So when cinnamon consistently reduces post-meal blood sugar spikes by 20 to 30%, as the research shows, it isn't just a blood sugar win in isolation, it's directly reducing how often and how intensely those glycemic inflammatory episodes hit kidney blood vessels, multiple times a day, every single day. Over months and years of consistent use, that reduction in daily glycemic stress may genuinely contribute to preserving kidney function over time. Every meal that produces a gentler blood sugar curve instead of a sharp spike is a meal where the kidney's filtering vessels take on a little less inflammatory damage. There's also a connection worth understanding carefully around creatinine. Elevated blood sugar over time is one of the most consistent dietary contributors to rising creatinine in people over 60, through the same progressive vascular damage described above. By supporting healthier post-meal blood sugar, daily Ceylon cinnamon use addresses one of the upstream dietary drivers behind creatinine elevation that a lot of people are actively trying to manage. To be precise about what this does and doesn't mean, cinnamon doesn't lower creatinine directly. It may reduce one of the underlying dietary mechanisms through which creatinine tends to climb over time in people dealing with insulin resistance, a distinction worth keeping clear rather than overstating. So here's the complete picture. Ceylon cinnamon, taken at half to 1 teaspoon daily, in the correct form, timed 15 to 30 minutes before your largest meal, activates insulin receptors through an insulin mimetic mechanism that directly addresses the age-related insulin resistance driving elevated blood sugar in most people over 60. Research shows it can reduce post-meal blood sugar spikes by up to 29%, which in turn helps protect kidney blood vessels from the glycemic inflammatory damage those spikes cause, and supports the upstream conditions that help prevent the kind of gradual creatinine elevation many people are working to manage. And it's a food you can buy for a few dollars, prepare in under a minute, and add to a warm morning drink. No prescription, no appointment, no complicated protocol required. One thing worth doing today is checking whatever cinnamon you already have at home. If the label doesn't specifically say Ceylon cinnamon, true cinnamon, Cinnamomum verum, or Cinnamomum zeylanicum, it's almost certainly cassia, not the right choice for daily therapeutic use. If that's the case, it's worth picking up Ceylon cinnamon from a health food store or online this week, starting with half a teaspoon in warm water with fresh lemon juice, 15 minutes before lunch, and doing that consistently for 30 days to see how you feel.